Welcome to Tales to Behold. Please, enter my chambers and make yourself comfortable. I don't get many visitors these days, but when I do, they all seem to beg for one thing in particular, and that is to leave my realm with a fantastic story. And my, do I have some good ones. Today, I would like to share a tale about 4 young mercenaries running from their soiled reputation in their quest to find greatness and reparations of their tarnished name. In this story, you will be walking alongside Bowen, a half-elf ranger, a true leader at heart but struggling to maintain order in his unorganized company of adventurers. You will be looking up at Berlin, a mighty dragonborn, a sailor by trade, but unapologetically banned from all vessels due to his snide tongue, pompous demeanor, and a bit of a short sword when it comes to controlling his anger. And of course, only to be seen when he wants to be seen, we have the cold and calculated Vato, a rogue elf that has made his coin through petty thievery, shady deals, and messy assassinations. And last, but certainly not least, Brysus, a kind-spirited tiefling with perhaps the biggest heart of the company. Brysus truly believes in the good in all people and is always quick to lend a helping and healing hand. Now, after a week's journey of running from their soiled reputations, they had found themselves tired, weary, and drowning in the thick, pungent fog of some unknown forest due west of their home city of Bowen. At least that is what they all thought. They were terribly lost. The dreariness was setting in and their senses of direction were spiraling due to the disorienting nature of this unknown forest they had wandered themselves into. The fog had nearly blinded their sight, and the hypnotic noises of their surroundings made them all fall into deep thought as to why they were on this journey to begin with. They were a self-proclaimed team of the most cunning mercenaries the western region of Bowen had ever seen, but their proclamation ended right there, with themselves. The truth of the matter is that after a botched attempt at saving the king's daughter, the company had no choice but to flee Bowen due to the sheer embarrassment and the disdain from the royals of the city. Those who have been, well, let's just say, grateful enough to employ their services have called them bold and unorganized, witless, the inventors of failure, screw-ups, experts of disorder, and with those with less sophisticated vocabularies, downright idiots. Though their reputation was less flattering than the innards of an orc's asshole, they all collectively had what the greatest mercenaries in history had: belief. They all knew and could feel the amount of potential they had and truly believed that with the right experience and opportunity, they could become highly sought after and profitable legends themselves. And that belief is ultimately what had gotten them trapped in this endless and eerie fog. In order for all of them to salvage their collective reputation and fulfill their self-prophecies of greatness, they had to find opportunity by those who knew nothing of their questionable past so they could one day return home cloaked in the greatness they would so much desire. If they could just get themselves out of that damned fog, Floracia would prove to be their gateway to prosperity, if they made it alive. As the company proceeded down the overgrown trail, it became apparent that the ground they covered was seldom traveled. Why? They did not know. The fog combined with the blackness of the night proved to be quite unsettling for our courageous band of mercenaries. Left, right, and all around, they were hearing unfamiliar sounds that were raising the finest hairs on the backs of their necks. And from the forest they heard moans, they heard groans, they heard roars from deadly beasts. But what really frightened them was what seemed to be a great cackling dancing through their ears from each and every direction. Though fear was invading their souls, the company made no mention of the ominous sounds. They proceeded to clench their fists, grit their teeth, and press forward. It was early into the morning, and their fatigue had worked its way from their legs up into their minds. Bowen saw what appeared to be 2 moving shadows through the fog. He quickly stopped and halted the company. He looked at Vato and said, "Do you see that?" "See what?" "Up ahead. The shadows." Quickly, the mysterious shadows dashed towards the tree line and vanished from the company's sight. Vato looked at Bowen with an alarming concern in his eyes, held out his hand and said, "Stay here." Vato raised his hood and sprinted off into the forest so quickly and silently that if you would have just blinked your eyes, you would have thought you witnessed a vanishing act. The company waited patiently while Vato scouted the situation. Moments later, the company heard a cry from the forest. Immediately, the company darted through the sticks and shrub to follow the path of the cry. When they arrived at the scene, they saw Vato holding two dwarves against a large tree with his rapier firmly pressed against both of their necks. "Please, don't kill me. I swear I didn't say a word. Just let me and my boy go." Berlin, the towering dragonborn, began to twirl his mighty warhammer in his hands, walked over towards the dwarves and looked down smitingly upon them. "Who is to say you aren't trying to kill us?" Bowen quickly intervened, pushed Berlin out of the way, and motioned towards Vato to lower his rapier. "Everybody just stop. What's going on here?" "I swear I said nothing. Just please, just let me and my son go." "Stop. We're not here to hurt you. We're just making our way to Floracia." "You what? You're traveling to Floracia? Why, you must have gotten off the path 100 miles back. How did you wind up on the trail to this hellish town?" "What hellish town do you speak of?" "Iron's Keep. I barely made it out of that forsaken town alive, and I'll be damned if I let them find us and slay my son and I. I've already lost one boy to that pit of a town, and I refuse to lose another." Berlin, with the rarest look of empathy, looked at the dwarf and said, "Tell us, what happened to your boy?" "His name was Grilmir. Just like everyone else in that town, he became addicted to this drug that's been plaguing all the workers. They eat this cursed clear mold called God Cloud and work all damn day and night just to wake up, eat more, and start the process all over again. All the money they make in the mines goes straight back into the pockets of the evil bastards that are bringing that awful substance into our town. It almost seems like they are forcing the miners to eat it if they want to keep their jobs or even worse, their lives. My son, though, my son was different. He got hooked on that God Cloud just like everyone else, but he got clean. He didn't run into trouble until he started trying to convince everyone else to get clean with him. One person joined him, then a few more, and then my son disappeared. One evening, I heard a knock at my door, and when I opened it, nobody was there, except for my son, Grilmir. He was laying there dead, bloodied, battered. I went to go raise hell, and I vowed to avenge my son's death. I stirred up quite the ruckus trying to find the ones that were responsible for that terrible, terrible tragedy. And it seemed that only shortly after, everywhere I went, I noticed that I always had a tail. I'm not lying when I say to you that I was followed everywhere The dwarf's breath appeared to be violently stolen from him as he quickly snapped his head back to look behind him. The company could now see that the dwarf was beginning to be showered with fear, anxiety, and desperation. "I think they're on my tail again. They surely want me dead. I have to go. Please, go visit Adbeck at the Deep Down Drinkery and Inn. Tell him Coolmore sent you. Let him know my boy and I are all right. Mention my name and he'll take care of you for the night. Please, travelers, that town needs your help. And please, avenge my son's death and find those bastards that killed him. I hope to hear of your victory and repay you someday down the road." Coolmore and his son departed from the company's presence. They all stood motionless as the two dwarves disappeared into the fog. Coolmore's condemnation of Iron's Keep made this company question if such a town should be avoided altogether. Drugs, grisly murders, fleeing families. The town reeked of trouble, but the company was tired, weak, hungry, and crippled by their thirst. As the dwarves left their sight, Vato appeared to be staring at the ground in deep thought, shaking his head. He popped his head up and he looked at the company and said, "Do you think we should just camp outside the town for a night and pass the city altogether? I mean, only judging by the looks of the trail, it looks like they don't get many visitors altogether, and for good reason. I don't know what you're thinking, but I would rather die quickly by their dwarven hammers than die of the thirst we're about to die of out here. Dwarves don't scare me anyway. Oh, would you imagine that the 6'6", 300-pound, big, ugly sack of scales isn't afraid of a few dwarves? Well, look at who you're talking to. No, Vato, you look who you're talking to. And if you keep moving your tongue the way that you are, those little dwarves will be the least of your worries. Brysus, though often quiet, had no choice but to intervene. Guys, listen to yourselves. You are acting like a bunch of children. We are all going. You heard Colmore. The town needs our help. Oh, Brysus, bless your heart. Just what I expected to hear from you. Go help them then. Seriously, go and help them. End up like Colmore's son and get chopped to pieces. Let's see how well you can heal without any hands. One would think that a town full of crime would be a sanctuary for a questionable character such as Vato, but the truth was that he was frightened by a town of dwarves, and feared that he would be a prime target for whatever heinous acts the dwarves could conjure. He was on this journey for the riches, and Iron's Keep sounded like a dangerous endeavor with little to no reward. But if Iron's Keep was the only hurdle he had to jump to realize his dreams of riches and opportunity in Floracia, then so be it. As the party continued fighting with one another, Bowen winced with utter disgust. It greatly angered him to see such a sight because he believed that the arguing was their prime source of disorder. He had quickly lost his temper and aggressively interjected. "That's enough! We're going to Iron's Keep. Let's just keep a low profile and get to the inn Colmore spoke of. I could really use a warm bed tonight, and maybe we could even find a little work while we're there. Let's just stay out of their problems and get to Floracia as soon as we can." The company stood for just a few moments longer discussing the pros and cons of staying in Iron's Keep, and they all agreed to continue trekking towards the town's gates. They marched forward as the fog began to slowly break. After miles of wondering if certain death was only feet ahead, their new sense of visibility made them feel born again. The company simply wanted a warm place to rest their heads, where they could dream of the prosperity they would achieve in Floracia. They were not prepared for the detour their journey had provided, but they were quite experienced in their plans going awry. They were going to have to make do with their stay in Iron's Keep until they could figure out how to resume their journey on the correct path. The 4 tired mercenaries continued on the trail. The rhythm of their footsteps and the sounds of the wilderness once again had each individual in deep thought. Bowen was imagining his company finally finding order and becoming the brilliant tacticians he aspired them to be. He envisioned the loud cheers and applause from the people in Floracia after maybe saving the city with an extravagant display of heroism. Oh, the glory and the respect they would have by all if they could just act as a unit instead of the tangled mess that they were. All Berlin could think about, other than his unquenchable thirst, he greatly missed the feeling of the ocean breeze washing over his scaled hide, the smell of salt water in the endless open air, and the simple but gratifying sound of his vessel cutting through the green waters. He would never admit how deeply he missed the sea, but the somber look he displayed when someone only mentioned the water told a sad story of a man that was banished from pursuing his greatest love in life. Although there would be great hell to pay if anyone ever accused him of it, Vato was scared. He did not spend his life perfecting the art of going unseen out of grit and toughness. No, he avoided fighting at all costs. Unfortunately, those who have ever been in a fight with Vato never even knew they were in one until they saw their own blood on their hands and slipped away into eternity, only for their smiter to never be seen. Vato was worried about blending into Iron's Keep. He was worried about relying on his team if things got out of hand. He wondered if his team would be there to protect him. Vato was beginning to regret the words he had shared with Berlin back down the trail and hoped that in the moment of truth he could still count on his friend's hammer to fight for him. This was why Vato preferred to work alone. Just a few nights, he thought, then off to the great city of Floracia, where he may no longer have to lurk in the shadows and be able to blend in wherever he may go. A life spent in the shadows had proved to be a lonely one for our friend Vato. Brysus was following the rest of the company 10 paces behind the rest. He could not vanquish what Culmore had said out of his mind. A town so corrupted by drugs that they were willing to dismember those who tried helping others rid themselves from the shackles of addiction. He needed it to help them. He couldn't resist the urge. But how was he going to convince the others? They only cared about prospering in Floracia. He thought to himself, was the company's sole purpose not to fix problems? Not to help others in need? Floracia would always be standing, but would Iron's Keep survive if this god cloud kept plaguing the people? Surely there were plenty of good people in Iron's Keep. He had to do something. He had to speak up when the time was right. He could not consciously leave until he knew he did all he could to rid them of their troubles, even if that meant breaking from the company and staying behind. The collective thoughts and dreams of the company suddenly ceased when just up the bend on the trail they saw 5 men steadily approaching. Despite their fatigue, they shifted into a fast focus. As the parties grew more near, the body language of the unidentified party brought forth a friendly demeanor that put our 4 friends at ease. As the 2 parties both proceeded forward, the group of 5, which could now be identified as dwarves, smiled and welcomed the travelers. The dwarf in the middle stepped forward with an inviting face and said, "Well, hey there, travelers. Coming to Iron's Keep, are you?" The company stood there with raised eyebrows and very much on guard. Given where they were and what they had just heard, they felt as though nobody could be trusted in those woods. Bowen stepped forward.
We're just passing through to find a warm place to rest our heads for the night.
Ah, well, you've picked a lovely place to rest your heads. It's such a great town full of some of the finest hard-working people. You'll find they are quite hospitable. Say, did you by any chance cross paths with my brother and his son earlier? His name is Culmore. I have to give him something. I haven't a clue when he'll be back.
Well, we are truly sorry, but we haven't seen a soul in 3 days.
And we are dying of thirst. Do you have any water that you can spare?
Water? Oh no. Well, we do. But I think we will just keep it for ourselves. As a matter of fact, I was going to ask all of you if you had something for us. You're on our trail, headed to our town, so we will take up payment now.
Bowen took a step backwards.
What payment do you speak of? The coin in your pocket, of course. All of it. We want it now.
Listen, we have nothing to give. We're traveling to find work. The dwarf slid his cloak to the side and boastfully unveiled his short sword. He quickly unleashed his weapon, and his friendly demeanor turned into a rage-fueled aggression.
Oh yeah? And what kind of work do you do?
Before the dwarf's words even reached the ears of Bowen, Vato pulled out 2 daggers and with the twisted grace of a ballet dancer, lunged at the dwarf from the side, dragging one dagger across his throat and with the other puncturing him under the ribs. Vato held the dwarf up and felt his warm blood washing over his hand. He leaned in and gently whispered into the dwarf's ear, "We are mercenaries." The dwarf's body then dropped and everyone watched as his blood framed his lifeless corpse. Both parties' eyes were fixated on the fallen dwarf, then fixated on each other, then the dwarf, then back to each other. There was silence between both groups. The dwarves then screamed and drew their weapons with fiery rage. Our friends took hold of their trusted iron and steel as the dwarves made their attack. The first dwarf lunged at Bowen with a hatchet, but Bowen sidestepped the assault and punched the dwarf square in the jaw, sending him straight into the iron-plated fate of Berlin's mighty warhead. The force dented his chest as blood spewed from his mouth onto Berlin's black and green striped scaled face. Glimmers of shining steel flew all around as battle cries filled the air. Brysus wasn't back. He was not a fighter and bowed his head in prayer.
He lifted his hands towards the heavens as a blue hue of light wrapped up around his legs from the earth and out his arms. The company was cast in the calming blue light and felt their energy restored. The breath of life made Bowen squeeze his sword just a little bit harder and his movement that much more agile. As another dwarf came near, with heroic speed and precision, Bowen drove his sword to the center of his neck. The dwarf gurgled, and he slashed his weapon at Bowen until Bowen himself gave his weapon a twist, ending the dwarf in an instant. Beside him, Vato was dancing with acrobatics while the slow and feeble dwarf attacked. His blade was missing in every direction while Vato smiled tauntingly. It was a vicious game of cat and mouse. Once the dwarf tired himself, Vato went in for the final strike. As he stabbed at his fatigued opponent, the dwarf came crashing down with a forceful, blind-sided strike of Brysus's mace. Vato looked at Brysus and said,
He was mine.
"No, he was ours. I have your back, brother." Vato couldn't help but smile. His curiosity of whether or not his team would have his back was finally relieved. The dwarves had all fallen except for one. The sole survivor stood in the middle of the company, shaking and shivering in the warmth of his slain friend's blood. He cried. He begged for his life. He swore to the company that he had no intention of fighting and it was all his friend's fault. Bowen tried to calm the frightened dwarf.
Listen, don't panic, don't freak out. I just want to talk. I have some questions.
"I have a question for you." Berlin stomped over to the dwarf, grabbing his collar and forcing him to his knees. "Does your god show mercy? Because I do not." Berlin swung his hammer back with a great cry and sent the hunk of iron whirling through the cool air. The dwarf's teeth went flying as his head burst open. The brain matter and blood spatter hit Vato like an ocean wave.
Are you serious? Why would you? You couldn't wait for me to get out of the way?
I couldn't bear for him to breathe a moment longer. Bowen threw his arms up in the air.
Well, what about getting answers?
Damn his answers. I didn't care to hear a thing about what he had to say. The company stood among the bloodbath of the unexpected attackers, wondering what to think of the mess of a situation they had gotten themselves into. Our friends, with the exception of Vato, who was by the tree line busy relieving his soured stomach, decided to move the bodies deep into the brush to remove any evidence of the bloody skirmish. Was this their warm welcome to Iron's Keep? Was the town far, far worse than Culmore described? If they even did decide to help, would they be fighting an invisible war above their pay grade? Join me for episode 2 to find out. Thank you for spending your time with me and listening to Tales to Behold. Please, bring this story to your own tabletop. Make it yours. Make it magical. Now I bid all of you farewell. Until next time, my friends.